Hi guys, welcome back aboard good old Athena for yet more DIY fun. The new year is almost upon us, and that means it's time for our classic year in review video where we take a look at all the progress made in 2021, which there was a lot of progress, and we'll also take a look at our upcoming plans for 2022, both in terms of DIY and sailing. There are also a few other things going on this week. For instance, we need a little bit of a head start on an upcoming series drogue video that will publish probably sometime in January. The thing is, that video is going to be so labor intensive, we need to get a little bit of a head start. If you're new to our channel, my name is Mads and this is my fiance Ava. I've spent the last 5 years doing a somewhat extensive refit on my 1987 Warrior 38 named Athena. That involved all kinds of fun stuff like building a new rudder using vacuum infusion, gutting most of the interior to make structural repairs, and then subsequently rebuilding most of the interior. I also rebuilt the entire deck and painted the top sides. All of that fun is documented in hundreds of videos here on YouTube. Right now I am kind of riding the struggle bus. I'm struggling a little bit to download all of the videos I created in 2021. I need those videos to be able to make the year in review segment. Google has this really neat feature where you can download all of your data from Google, in my case including the original or at least a higher resolution of video file than I can download from anywhere else of my previous videos. The thing is, that is one big package, so you can't really pick and choose, and for 8 years worth of videos, it kind of adds up. 1,558 gigabytes, also known as roughly 1.5 terabytes, or the rough equivalent of 750,000 photos from a modern iPhone. That is a lot of data considering our somewhat slow 4G internet connection. Based on the transfer speeds I've seen over the last couple of days, we have another 3 or 4 days to go. Instead of just sitting around and twiddling my thumbs, why don't I distract myself by doing a little bit of DIY. There are many different strategies for dealing with heavy weather while sailing. I am definitely not a real-world expert. I've never really done any heavy weather sailing, and I hope to never have to. But I have read a couple of books on the subject, just to prepare ourselves a little bit. It is an interesting topic for sure. I just don't feel a burning desire to get stuck in really bad weather. But yeah, we will touch on a few of those strategies in our upcoming drogue video. And that is, of course, what I hope to turn this fashion-forward pile into: a homemade series drogue. If you're not familiar, a series drogue is a bunch, and I do mean a big bunch, of little cones attached to a long line that's attached to the transom of the boat. There's a bunch of information available out there on the internet, including forums where heaps of people go over their opinions for type, weight of fabric, size of the cones, how to attach them to the line, what type of line to attach them to, how to avoid chafe, how to deploy the thing, how to retrieve the thing, and just the list is endless. A lot of the time, forum posts like that are not super helpful because it ends up being just a couple of people yelling at each other over some kind of weird minute detail that doesn't really matter all that much. In my search, I did find a couple of PDFs that were really helpful. Chief among them was the original test report from the US Coast Guard, because they did a bunch of testing on this subject way back in 1987. That PDF is definitely worth reading. It is absolutely fascinating, but I'll include links for all of the PDFs down in the description. One of those PDFs is a guide from Sailrite. It looks like they used to offer a kit for making your own series drogue. I cannot find the kit anywhere on their website anymore, so I don't think they offer it anymore. And that's a little bit of a shame, because that would save us a lot of work, both in terms of cutting the fabric and everything, but also because sourcing the materials for this was a little bit of an adventure. The nylon webbing we were able to get our hands on is a little bit thicker than it needs to be, which means it's going to be a little bit more difficult to work with. But yeah, this was what we could get our hands on. The weight of our fabric is kind of middle of the road. From my little bit of internet research, I've seen people use anything from 2 ounces to 4 ounces. And this is 80 grams per square meter, which I think puts us at like 2.4 ounces, something like that. So yeah, this should work, but something a little bit stiffer would certainly have been easier to work with. The good thing about the materials we've got here is that they should hopefully work, but if they don't, then they were fairly cheap. So yeah, if we have to buy other stuff, it's not really the end of the world. Let's make the first of the 140 cones we need and see how that turns out. Our humble cone is coming along nicely. Now we just kind of need to double it over to actually turn it into a cone. This is now an actual cone shape. Very useful. We still need to turn this inside out. But before we do that, the very last thing I'm going to do is just to bend this piece of webbing over and stitch that to the other side of the webbing. And here we go. That is the finished cone. That looks pretty dang spiffy. This first cone took about an hour. That's not really great news considering that we still have 139 more to make, but I'm sure the next ones are going to be quicker. In the hope of streamlining our process, we decided to cut out material for the first 50 cones. First improvement was to get better templates. Out with the paper and in with thin plastic cutting boards. Armed with our new templates and a pair of new markers, drawing the shapes we need to cut out was a lot easier. Ava did the rough trimming and then I cut out the final shape. Ava had the great idea of using her rotary cutter on the straight bits. That was a big help. We busted out the old trusty sail ride and started sewing the webbing on the leading edges of the cones. While I was doing that, Ava was folding the webbing and securing it onto the fabric with little plastic clips. The process worked very well. I think we'll try raising the sewing machine a little bit next time so I don't have to bend over as much. In about an hour we had all of the leading edges covered on the first 50 cones. I don't think there is much we can do in terms of optimizing this part of the process. Ava then started cutting the webbing that'll attach the cones to the line. Each cone gets 3 lines. In an attempt to make this step easier, we've ordered some basting tape, but that won't show up for a few days. That is the first 50 cones done. That was crazy labor intensive and we still have another 90 cones to make. But the SSDs showed up and this contains 8 years worth of work, 1.5 terabytes worth of videos. It's crazy that that fits in that small of a thing, but yeah, let's go ahead and get started on the year in review. 2021 started out with Athena just having gone back in the water. The interior of the boat was coming along, but still far from finished. The forward cabin still had the original layout with the outline of the old forward head visible. Up on deck there was also a lot of work to do. No tow rail, no stanchions, no nunskit, no arch. 2021 was going to be a very busy year. I started out January by installing winches in the cockpit and making a mock-up of the solar arch. Back inside of the boat, it was finally time to get started on the DC systems by installing the Blue Sea distribution panels. Also, I installed a basic NMEA 2000 network, GMI 20 displays, chart plotter and Ethernet network to connect the radar and the camera at the top of the mast. In the forward cabin, I tore out the old vanity and used that space to build a giant clothing locker with 8 giant drawers for Ava's clothing. I used drawer slides to make the drawers super easy to open and close. There are 3 big shelves, a hanging section, and then the 8 drawers. Ava loves it. Next up was the V-Berth. I removed the old moldy foam-backed vinyl, installed supports on the hull, and then with the help of my parents, sanding the forward cabin was a breeze. With the surface prep out of the way, I made a new headliner and installed LED lights before finally engaging in a bit of delightful varnishing. This was but a small taste of things to come. I cut mahogany slats to cover the sides of the hull. I dry fitted all of them before installing the insulation, and then all of the mahogany slats were varnished up at the workshop before finally installing them back in the V-Berth and adding a couple of LED strips for a bit of mood lighting. After beautifying the V-Berth, I installed our washer and dryer in the forward cabin. I'm happy to report they're still both going strong. Next up, I used 18mm plywood and some mahogany strips to make a door for the forward cabin. At this time, I still had Obelix, the 30-foot sailboat I'd lived aboard for almost 8 years before moving aboard Athena. Before selling Obelix, I wanted to spruce her up a bit. Some new hatches in the cockpit and a trip up on the hard was required. After scraping the bottom, a bit of elbow grease in the shape of polishing and a fresh coat of anti-fouling, Obelix looked a lot better. She was sold after only a few weeks. Back aboard Athena, I installed our freezer in the forward cabin, an isotherm BI-53 that so far has had no issues. Before continuing work inside of the boat, I installed the stanchion bases for our DIY mini bulwark. That meant I could put up stanchions and some temporary lifelines. Inside the boat, it was time to cut more mahogany slats for the settee area. The bulkhead got a couple of dabs of fairing compounds before I was finally able to paint it. A few years ago I changed the layout of the interior, and since then a small piece of plywood had been missing on the side of the cabin tub, so I added that back, and then I also added a port light in the aft cabin to get better ventilation and a bit of light in there. We needed a little locker for our isolation transformer and inverter charger. Bam! Aft cabin painted and insulated. After yet more time spent varnishing, the aft cabin was starting to look pretty dang spiffy. Over the next few weeks I spent a lot of time fairing and sanding the head. I got a short break from that when I built the battery compartment that would house our lithium battery. The cells are sandwiched in between two pieces of stainless that are then bolted to the hull. Up at the workshop I was about to discover my least favorite activity of 2021, polishing stainless. It's slow, tedious work, but at least you get covered in a mixture of polishing paste and metal dust, so you get incredibly dirty, so that's nice. Having said that, the end result was definitely worth it. In between never-ending sessions of polishing, it was time for the first test fit of the solar arch, which of course would also need polishing. To not go insane, I took a break from the polishing and worked on the head, building the new shower pan out of 10mm foam. I glued it together in place to make sure it had the right shape, removed it and laid up glass to make it strong enough to work on. Back to polishing. Oh, the humanity. Time for another polishing break. This time I installed the windlass. I had a backing plate laser cut in stainless and used that backing plate as a template to drill all the holes I needed before sealing all of them and then installing the windlass. In a desperate attempt to not go back to polishing stainless, I decided to add in-floor heating to the shower by adding a bit of soft copper tubing to the shower pan. Warm feet and an excuse not to polish. Win-win. Back aboard Athena, the fairing of the head was almost complete and it was time to install the shower pan. I filled the void between the shower pan and the cabin sole with expanding epoxy foam, added a single layer of glass to protect the plywood before then finally being able to paint the entire head. It is amazing how big of a difference a little bit of paint makes. Of course, no head is complete without a Bluetooth-enabled throne. I'm happy to report no hacking incidents of our Raritan Marine Elegance as of yet. I was done polishing the arch and it was time to add the sliding mechanism that allows to fit 4 household-size solar panels. From this angle, for a lack of better word, the wing looks enormous, but it's not quite that bad in real life. The arch also has an integrated dinghy lifting contraption, so we can easily get the dinghy out of the water to avoid growth. With Ava finally aboard Athena, there was starting to be a distinct lack of dust and the entire boat started smelling oddly clean. We added our brand new cushions to the V-Berth and bam, the boat really started feeling like a home. There's no doubt that the most frustrating project of the year was the high output alternator. It was an incredibly drawn out and slow process. A pulley kit that didn't fit, an alternator that didn't fit, another alternator that didn't fit. In the end, I had to modify the tensioning arm to make the alternator fit. This was all supposed to have been bolt-on good to go, and to this day I still don't have a 100% finished setup, but we'll get back to that over the next coming months. There were still a few items left on the exterior to-do list, like for instance applying Kiwi Grip to the deck. Ava was a huge help and a true Kiwi Grip application expert. The deck was making its way up the spiffy scale, but to get it all the way to 11, we added our DIY mini bulwark. Inside the boat we added a layer of glass to the kitchen island and opened up the storage underneath the cabin sole and then finally painted the cabin sole to protect the plywood. It was finally time for the finishing touches in the head, like a grey water pump, headliner, LED lights and a couple of mirrors for Ava. Before our first sail we installed our new Garmin autopilot and just like that, after 5 years of work, Athena was back out on the water. It felt amazing just gliding along on a nice sunny day. In a plot twist of epic proportions, our DIY diesel generator was replaced with a brand spanking new Fisher Panda 5000i that had the distinct upside of actually being able to fit in through the head, one of the more expensive mistakes I've made to date. It was an overcast early fall day before we were finally ready to leave Skive. It had been 7 years since I sold my house and moved aboard Obelix to be able to afford a bigger boat. It had been a lot of work also, and there's still a lot of work ahead of us, but it felt nothing short of amazing to finally be underway. Over the next month and a half, we made our way from Denmark to the south coast of England. We did a lot of motoring. It was all about getting to the UK before Ava's Schenken clock ran out. It was early October before we saw the white cliffs of Dover, and then finally made our way to Gosport Premier Marina, where we'll be spending the winter. In Gosport, we continued working on the boat, adding lights in the cockpit, starting the beautification of the companionway, installing a super spiffy Nordic floor that really made the interior of the boat feel finished. We also measured for new sails, installed more C-zone digital switching stuff, added a DIY fuel polisher, and tons of other stuff. Ava and I had a really nice, relaxing Christmas. As you might be able to tell by the lack of decorations, Christmas is now over. We took a couple of days off and did absolutely nothing, which was really nice. Santa, in the shape of Nina and Julian, thank you so much guys, brought some boat-related Christmas presents. There's a temperature and humidity doohickey, and then there is a barometer. What's really cool is that this has the temperature both in Celsius and in Fahrenheit. Celsius, of course, being the unit that makes the most sense of the two, but it is nice that we can both look at this and make sense of the reading without having to do mental gymnastics. Santa also brought something else in the shape of a YouTube silver play button. It showed up around the 22nd of December, and this is probably the best Christmas present I could ever have hoped for. I still remember reaching 1,000 subscribers. I never imagined I'd make it to 100,000, so thank you so much for sticking around, guys. Next week we'll have to figure out somewhere to install / hang all of this. I was planning on having a small segment in the end of this video about our upcoming plans for the next year, but I think we'll push that until next week. We still have a lot of tasks on our to-do board here. There are exciting updates to a couple of them. We also have all of our exciting sailing plans for 2022, mainly the Atlantic crossing. But yeah, I just don't want to cram all of that stuff into the end of this video and just rush through it to be able to get it in there. So I think we'll postpone all of that until next week. And speaking of next week's video, we're thinking about including a little Q&A section. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and leave those in the comment section down below. We'll sift through them and then we'll answer a few of the most popular questions. And on that hopeful note, we'll end this week's video here. We hope to see all you guys back here at Athena next week for yet more DIY fun. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video,
please remember to leave a like.
See you!